there's a lot of pull on your time. We feel like it's a treat.
Even if it's 10 minutes, which sounds ridiculous. And sometimes we kid ourselves that it's not enough time. Hi, I'm Ruth.
And I'm Debs. Art Alchemy, authentic conversations about art and cultivating the creative mind.
For today's episode, we're going to be talking about carving out creative time.
Because this is a difficult thing that all artists face, not just professional artists, although you would think that professional artists would make loads and loads of time for art. But there's a lot of pull on your time, and sometimes even we feel like it's a treat, which sounds strange when it's your core part of your business.
Yeah.
It's very easy to get distracted. So for others, anybody who's just starting out on art, they also have this problem, you know.
I've heard it from a lot of people, like you say, Debs, everything from people that are just kind of hobby artists that all do a little bit here and there, up to people that are professionals, that it's their full-time career, that, like you say, you'd think they'd have no problems spending time on their creative practice, but I think it's a challenge for everybody. It will also be interesting to talk about what is creative time, what contributes to your creativity as well.
Yes, yeah, because when we talk later, we're going to talk about something called artist dates, and I'll leave you to be intrigued about what that is. But other people will perceive you sometimes as doing your art all of the time, and yet you think, well, no, actually, I'm not doing that much art. So it's interesting. But then also when you stop and think about what you do on an everyday basis, and we'll talk about that too, sometimes that feeds into your art. So
yeah,
there's flip sides to the coin.
Yeah, lots to talk about. So I think we wanted to start out by discussing where each other are at the moment in terms of our creative time, how much creative time we've got, the sorts of challenges that we've got as well, because we're both in quite different scenarios, but we've both got similar challenges as well with our time. So at the moment, I actually work in a full-time corporate career in IT. So you can imagine my creative time. I've only got, weekends, evenings, mornings to do my artwork. But the positive thing is that by the time this podcast episode goes out, which is why I can talk about it, is that within a couple of weeks I'll be finishing up in that day job and going for my art full-time, which is really exciting.
It is very exciting.
Yeah, but I mean, all I've known for the past sort of 15 years plus is fitting my art around a day-to-day job, because I've not had the luxury of being able to go full-time yet with it.
Yeah, so how have you done that, Ruth? How have you actually managed it? Because I almost can't imagine doing the amount that you've done.
It's not been easy. It's not been. Well, for me, a big part of it and a big turning point of it was when, the pandemic hit. And for my job, that meant that I went from commuting every day from Dunfermline to Edinburgh to having that time back at home, because I could work at home because I've been a remote worker. So that enabled me to at least get the morning in to do my artwork before I logged on. And when we talk about carving out time, it has been that. I've literally had to carve out time around my 9-to-5 job. And I've had to be quite strict with protecting that time as well in order to get it. So that's how I've done it, really, is in the morning before I log on, I'll do at least, even if it's 10 minutes, which sounds ridiculous. And sometimes we kid ourselves that it's not enough time and I've got to have at least a couple of hours to do anything meaningful. But quite often mine is 10 minutes, half an hour in the morning. And then it builds up, and it's quite surprising actually how quickly that can build up into a painting.
That is amazing actually, because I think I've got a lot more time than that really if I chose to do it. And I do think that I don't paint on a daily basis. I tend to paint in bigger chunks, and I have been thinking that really I need to do more of a daily basis, even if it's a smaller amount. What tends to happen with me is if I start doing a smaller amount, then it turns into a bigger chunk because I can do that.
Yeah.
Not always, because I'll talk about my restrictions on time in a minute, but that's quite interesting. That 10 minutes here and there. Yeah. I think that comes to something we will talk about later as well, about setting up a space for you to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people won't have that opportunity of just that it means getting out all their art materials or setting up so we'll talk about that later as well. But that's quite inspiring, to be honest, that you've actually managed to do what you do.
Well, I mean, it's out of necessity really, because I think if I didn't do my creative stuff, and I've been there before where I've stopped doing it because I've got a bit fed up with everything, but I've just found that, you know, my mental health suffers if I don't do it, if I'm being honest, you know. So it's definitely a mood booster for me as well. It's not just a practical side of it, but it's giving myself time doing something that I love.
I find that I don't know what the word is, but I get sort of, I call it antsy. I get like almost a little bit irritated.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
I've become difficult to live with if I've not had my painting time, put it that way.
So if there's any partners out there listening, it's very important to allow us to have our creative time.
It is, otherwise you get very snappy.
It's amazing how much better you feel.
I don't know about you, Debs, but I also find that if I've not picked up a brush in a couple of weeks, it then becomes a bit more difficult to get started again. So doing it every day, it's not as scary because you're just used to doing it and giving yourself half an hour or whatever on the canvas. And then we are going to be talking about getting into a bit of a habit as well, aren't we? Which I think is something that's helped me, is doing it at a set time. A lot of people seem to paint in the evening and at night, but for me, I prefer the morning. I prefer that morning light as well when you first get up. And I suppose it's been a little bit like for me going to the gym as well. If I can get it done in the morning, then I've done it for that day, and then I can kind of focus on my day job. It puts me in a better mood for the day. But I think a good question to ask yourself is, what time is good for you to create, whether it's a morning or evening or daytime, obviously depending on your personal circumstances of when you work as well. What about you, Debs? Have you got particular times that you find that you prefer going into your studio?
I find that I'm a little bit slower to get started in the morning. I'm in there for about 10 o'clock. Class is a little bit earlier because I have class a couple of times a week. But it's just, I do other things before I go in. So I might answer emails or social media or little bits like that. And then I come into the studio. And then it depends. And this is where my pools are different to your pools, because I have other things like classes to prepare for or workshops or whatever. So sometimes I feel like I come into the studio and then I either go onto the computer or I do something that is pulling me away from my own creativity. And sometimes I can be preparing things that are for a workshop that are still not my own art. It's difficult sometimes to know what is my art and what isn't, because it all feeds into each other. Like you say, that 10 minutes in the morning, if you did a sketchbook practice, it would still be your art, wouldn't it? So I suppose it all is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do feel a pull in different directions.
Yeah. And do you think there's something psychological going on there with mindset, where it's more difficult to sit down and do the creativity rather than do something that's quite, you know, you already know what you're doing with a workshop, you know what you've got to do to get set up, you know, you've got to do X, Y, Z before it begins, whereas creativity is a little bit more unpredictable. You don't always know what you're going to be doing on the canvas, do you, until you start? Sort
of. I think it is a mindset thing, but I don't think it's necessarily the creativity thing, because I love the blank canvas. I think it might be more the other things feel more important, which is
Okay.
really strange. It's that more of a fact that it's more like a treat.
Yes, yeah. It's
Yeah,
more of a luxury
so that's
to use your
different from,
time.
I've not got a fear of the blank canvas. I know other people have.
That's quite
but
unusual, actually, that you haven't.
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of a fear of the big ones, which is a bit different, because it's a change. Yeah, I suppose the big ones is it feels more important. So they're on the wall and they're there waiting. I've put them on the wall deliberately because I want to get on with it. But I feel like I'm clearing the decks with the little ones, and I really don't know. Sometimes it's a little bit like they're there, they're ready. Is it that it's just not the right time? Because what I'm trying to do with the little ones is do all the finishing stages, which I don't actually like very much, like doing the edges, doing the varnishing, and that's necessary too, you see.
Yeah.
So I'm almost, it's like still that they're a treat that's waiting for me when I've finished all the little ones.
Yeah, yeah.
What I am doing though is trying to pay attention to what I'm doing now, where before I used to sometimes I'd have a flurry of productivity, not like what you're doing from necessity really. You've got to do 10 minutes every day or half an hour every day. I don't do that in that way. I might do weeks of painting and it might be starting paintings, weeks of finishing paintings. I actually go through different
phases,
parts of the process in blocks. It's sort of how I work. Yeah, I think it's seasonal as well. So I go out because spring is like sketch season, so I go out and do a lot. So that's gathering work. So that's a different part of the process. So I think it might be because other people don't do this. I know that people finish a painting at a time. Yeah. I don't. Yeah. I do lots of paintings, start them all, then I do lots of paintings, finish them all.
I do tend to still work in collections, even though I'm working on things a little bit at a time. So I'll have a set of canvases that I can move from. So if there's one that I'm stuck on, I tend to find where I drag my feet a little bit, like you were saying you don't like the finishing bit of it. I find when it starts to get a little bit tricky in the middle, when you know that phase where a painting's like half done, half not done, and
when you move from the creative side and you've got to start analysing, you've sort of got to start
and kind of making critical decisions about which bits you want to keep, which bits you don't, because it's kind of like the middle turning point of a painting when you're at that stage. I find that bit the hardest bit to like get through.
I think that's probably my hardest bit. Yeah. There's a difference between liking, like the finishing is more, once I'm doing it, it's more a job. It's like I'm talking about varnishing, doing the edges, putting the little D-rings on the back and stuff like that. Once I'm going, it's okay and I can get into a rhythm of it. But I don't particularly, it's not my favourite bit because it's not the creative bit.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think often as well, I've sort of, by the time the painting's done and it's finished, I've kind of lost interest in it in a way, because I've been through which sounds weird, but you've been through your creative process, you've had your challenges with it, your bits that have gone well, and by the end of it, you're kind of thinking, oh, that's done now, let's get on with the next painting.
Yeah, on to the next blank canvas.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I see the blank canvas phase I really like. I have, and I do get it that other people don't like it, but that's
Did you used to struggle with it? Have you got any tips for people that you've always just...
No, I don't think I've ever struggled with it. I think sometimes what I like to do, which is it's slightly different, but it is to do with the blank page. I like to stimulate ideas by just putting things on it, like if it was a sketchbook, doing collages or putting some ink blobs or things like that. I love that. because you've got something to work against to stimulate those ideas. But I am never, ever short of ideas. And I know that that's unusual. I just constantly collect ideas.
Yeah.
And I do that all the time. I don't have to try.
Yeah.
That's something that I just
happens.
I do in everyday life. I don't do that. That's just, I'll be out and I take hundreds of photographs all the time. Too many, really. And that's my problem's more the narrowing it down. I get really excited by new materials. So I do have an issue because my issue is the niching issue and because I love materials, I love creativity. That's what I love to do. So my problems are more getting that into finished products and then, those sorts of things.
Yeah. I think as I step into being a full-time artist, I think I might struggle with that a little bit because I've not got the same constraints on my time, which you think is a negative thing, but it can be quite helpful because you think, well, I've got to focus and I've got to spend this amount of time doing this. Yeah. And there's no point, looking at different things or this is what my collection's going to be. And I am quite focused in terms of what I want it to look like because I have got that limit on my time.
I do have goals that I fix to. And that's possibly causes me problems with doing the painting because I am quite goal orientated. I can be a bit last minute. So if I know that I've got an exhibition to do, I will get the paintings done for that exhibition because I have to do that.
Yeah, that definitely helps, doesn't it? I mean, last year I did probably the most amount of paintings that I've ever done. But I knew that I had Glasgow Art Fair booked and I had a gallery down in Brighton as well that had some of my artwork in that I sold a few paintings with. So I had to replace those, which is a nice problem to have. So I think if you've got something like that going on, it's naturally going to motivate you, isn't it, to do more artwork and spend the time and carve out the time. Whereas when you're first starting and you're in a phase of where you're probably just exploring, finding your own style and your own niche and what it is that you want to do, it can feel more challenging because you've not got that same pressure on you. It's about making time for you to develop your own art practice, which can be more difficult, I think, because you're not doing it for any particular output.
Yeah, I think it's more, well, I suppose just the less goal orientated, which creativity often isn't goal orientated at all.
Yeah. And we're all kind of brought up, aren't we, to do things for a reason and be efficient, and especially in the world of work, it's like your time is money.
And you've just said something really interesting. You probably don't realise you said it. You said that you do things for a reason. And I think that that's the issue that people have with art sometimes. Because what they do is they think, I need to get the washing up done, I need to do this, because those are things that they know they need to do. Whereas I'm going to go and paint a painting. Do you need to do that? And the goal, that reason for doing it, sometimes it's hard to justify to ourselves. So I've run painting holidays and had people say, it is so nice to just have this block of time where I can just paint. And they're amongst other people who want to paint, who understand that. And it is amazing. That's what they get out of the painting holiday more than the actual painting. It's almost, that's a bonus, but that having that time to do that creativity, that's the bit that they love about doing a painting holiday. It's interesting. And workshops as well. You've got that time just to, they like to have something at the end of the day, but really it's also about the being with other people who are painting and giving yourself that permission to do it for a whole day. Yeah. We wanted to talk a little bit about studio time versus creative time. The reality is we have studios. it's really, when we talk about things like this, we're talking about when do we literally, physically go into our studio. But we also do other creative things that aren't in the studio. And I just thought we'd talk a little bit about that, because you can be being very creative without actually being in the studio physically, so to speak. And then there's a flip side to that. What happens when you haven't got a studio? Where is your studio space? So there's quite a lot there to unpack. Let's see what we can do. Yeah.
Because, I mean, I feel very fortunate that I've got my own space now, because it wasn't always that way. And it is definitely beneficial to have your own space that's kind of cordoned off for the rest of the house, and to have the luxury of being able to have that space just for your own creativity. But there are lots of other sort of ways and means of doing it if you're starting out. For example, I know, Deb, you said that you started out on your kind of kitchen table in the past, didn't you? And I think we've all been there as artists, finding a little space.
That's what my students do. You listen to what they say that they do, and it might be a little corner of the living room or they're doing sketchbook work or whatever. Obviously, we haven't always had studios. It hasn't worked like that, because you don't. You start with a kitchen table, and then I moved on actually to a third bedroom, and had a real problem because there was carpet on the floor. So in the kitchen it was all right. There was no carpet on the floor, and I used to do things like resin. It was just like so. And I've got bits of resin still on the floor now, but don't tell George. And I got some of these jigsaw mats that you get for kids, you know, that and I put them on the floor, but then you've got to think, it's not. You don't want it to be slippy. But that sort of solved the problem. Yeah, for me, because I thought, and it was quite nice and warm under your feet as well. And I used to go in there and I just got my easel and a table. I think, did I have a table? Maybe not, actually. Yeah, something to put stuff on. Yeah,
it is something important to think about, because it can be something that can hold you back if you've not got your own space and you're having to think about, I'd like to do this, but I've got nowhere to do it. There are ways and means around it, you know, thinking about what flooring, putting down plastic sheeting I've done in the past. But if you've got it all there ready to go, it's one less thing to worry about, to give yourself the time to do your studio time.
And I certainly think for the 10-minute type idea that you're talking about, and you're talking about painting, then having something like, I mean, in your case, you've got oils, and I've got, I have, if you have a stay wet palette type thing for acrylic, then, and you've got a cover and it's already all out, then you can lift it up and you can paint a bit, and then you can just put your lid back on and just do a quick clean of your brushes. Yeah, that's fine. But if you have to get every single thing out, I've got some little pots, and what I do is I try to keep the colours of the current project that I'm doing together, because otherwise I forget this. I do this a lot. Forget what colours I'm using on a piece of art, because I've moved on to something else, and then I've come back and I'm like, what colours did I use? And really, you almost have to get yourself organised there. So and it's a bit different for me, because I'm producing quite a few pieces of art. And I also start to produce things that are to do with workshops, which are completely different colours or whatever. But I've started to log it on a Trello board as well, because I do in sketchbooks. I do test in sketchbooks, but I also test colours on bits of paper, and I get a bit scrappy sometimes. Yeah. And then I've lost it, that bit of paper. Told me what colours I've used. And I know that sounds so... Other people will be so organised, but I'm not, and that stops you when you because it's like you come back to the painting and you go, what colour have I used? Yeah. So if you've got like an area that's set up, I have the problem, which you wouldn't think, but because I change to workshops and then I'm changing back to studio time, and that causes me a disruption in that space, even though I've got all this space. Yeah. That's something I've got to think about, actually. In fact, after this, I'm going to truly think about it. But
Yeah.
I have started this Trello board with the paintings. So as I do a painting, I put the colours down, because it is a big, that is a stopping point for me. It's definitely a sticking point.
I think it comes back to knowing yourself, doesn't it? Knowing your own, what you're good at, what you're not so good at, the things that could get in the way. So these are important questions to ask yourself as an artist, how you work best to make the most of your creative time. We've talked quite a lot about studio time, being in the studio, doing the actual painting or whatever it is that you do in your art practice. I think it would be interesting to talk about the creative time that feeds into that studio practice, because you can't sit there and do your painting if you've not had anything to inspire you, which can take all different forms, can't it, in terms of your creative time, what you do to get inspired outside of being in the studio.
Yeah, I think that sometimes the blank canvas problem does come partly from not having the ideas of what to do.
Yeah.
And not even knowing how to go about getting those ideas. People overthink it. So they think that getting ideas is a difficult thing in itself, as opposed to just going out and just painting whatever it is that attracts them. You know, it's really sort of weird thing that people get caught up in.
It is.
And that is one of the blank canvas issues that people get.
Because I found that quite a lot in my workshops, especially with the new people that come along. I'll give them a few cues as to what to draw outside. Like today we're going to be focusing on, say, tree barks, or we've got peacocks in our local park. And then you'll find as you go around to each person has interpreted that slightly differently. So whether they're particularly interested in the texture on the tree bark, someone might be interested in the patterns, another person it's going to be the colours that stand out. But quite often they'll say things like, I don't know whether I'm doing this right, but this is what I find interesting. And I'm like, no, you need to go with what you find interesting, because it's going to be slightly different for each person.
It makes you unique, and that's what makes the art, because the art is about your expression of something.
Yeah,
rather
and the bit
than
that you find interesting.
Yeah, you can learn to copy somebody else's art, but that's different. That's technique. That's not creativity. It's sort of, it's a different side of the coin, really.
It is, and there's definitely something about tuning into your own voice and listening to yourself, which can take a little bit of time, in my experience, to really work out what it is that you find interesting about. I know recently, Debs, that you've been reading The Artist's Way, and in that they talk about artist dates, going out, doing an activity that you find interesting as a source of inspiration.
I love the idea of artist dates because it covers two things. It's giving you this permission to do the art, because not only, without going into too much detail about The Artist's Way, it's a really good book, but there's two things, activities that they get you to do. One is the morning pages, which means that you sit down and you have time to just write whatever's coming into your head and just free flowing, which means that, and really not even thinking about it, just getting it out there. But it does help you to clarify without even trying, because you're trying not to try, really. You're just trying to get it out of your head. But then the other thing is this artist's date, and I think that everybody should have an artist's date because what they say is every week you should have this artist's date. So have a date with your artist, book it into your calendar, do whatever, but definitely do it. And it's a treat, whatever you want to do. And it doesn't mean, by saying that, people who don't paint, or they can still have artist dates. It could be, it's really a date with your creativity. That could mean that you go for a walk and pay attention to, the way the light's hitting the trees. or you go to an art gallery, or you treat yourself to a new tube of paint. Or it doesn't have to be how you imagine it to be, as in you sit down and do a painting. That's not necessarily what it is. Just anything that's going to connect you to your creativity. And I thought that was a fabulous idea, and partly because I felt like suddenly I got permission to do this. I did mention it to George, and he said, Debbie, every day in your life is an artist's day.
I love that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I do treat myself to a lot of arty things. But
widening that spectrum a little bit more, though, isn't it? So, for instance, like for an artist day, I've gone out to a flower shop and bought myself some gorgeous flowers that, you know, I've picked out myself and that I like, because I do a lot of florals and botanics. I've done stuff like I've mooched around charity shops because I love all the different weird things, you know, weird odds and ends that you find in charity shops. So it could be absolutely
could walk in
anything.
a bluebell ward. What they actually said was this week, because I think I'm on week 4, you're meant to do or it might be week 5, I can't remember. You have to do a whole day of artist dates.
Yeah.
But you see, for me, that's not very difficult, because I'll go out in the van with Lydia and we'll paint and sketch and do things like that. Could be, you know, and we do that this time of year. Normally, she's actually away at the minute. That's when it comes to spring and summer, those are things that I do. So it's not that difficult for me. But for you could go out, and I don't mean, I'm talking you, all of you could treat yourself to, you know, going to an art gallery, eating some beautiful food, but paying attention to how it looks, or, you know, all that sort of thing is treating. It's a treat, isn't it, really? An artist date is a treat.
And I think it's just about learning to observe things, tuning to yourself, and treating everything as a potential creative source of inspiration, which I think, you know, the observational skills is something that you just keep building on as an artist. Is it something that you've always had, or do you think there was a particular turning point where
I think observationally, for certain, it's got better over years, because when I did the course and we were doing creative writing particularly rather than the music, I think my creative writing, you started to observe things. I've always written poetry because I wrote poetry in my 20s as well, and I've written poetry when I've been poorly. I've written it just to get a little bit like the morning pages, just to get it out there, or sometimes I just felt inspired and I'd just write some words. Is about observation. So I used to observe, you know, the relationships between people, or the relationships between the seasons and our lives. You know, the fact that we're born, and the spring and the growth and all of that. I've always paid attention to those sorts of things. The things that now come out in the art I was writing about in my 20s. I've also noticed is that when people start in class, they start to say to me, oh, I've noticed that the skies are cerulean blue or something. And I'm not necessarily, it's the colours. I mean, I do that sometimes. But it may be they say they noticed the leaves blowing and the way the lights caught them. But they often notice colours first as well. They start to see more colours. So, and it's interesting that when you start to paint, you might think of something as just green, and then you'll go, oh yeah, there's lots of different greens, or there's lots of different, you know, the way that the light hits that animal or something, that, you know, my cat, as that I can see the shadows and the darks and the lights in the face. And people definitely say that when they first start. So I don't know, Ruth, whether you've had people mention that, because you've been doing this art in the park, haven't you?
Yeah. I have seen that, and I have noticed that when people first join, and then you start giving them permission to actually just follow the thing that they find interesting, whether that's colour, texture, whatever it might be, that they start to tune into themselves more and observe things. And it's about noticing what you notice. And I think if you go back to our podcast and listen to the sketchbook episode, if it's something that you want to explore more, that's a really good episode to listen to, because we go into observational skills quite a lot in that episode, don't we, Debs?
And we also talk about journals and observing ourselves.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot to it, and it is definitely a skill that you have to learn to. I think particularly nowadays as well, whereas technology and everything has got us all moving so quickly and all addicted to our phones, that we sort of zoning out of the real world, aren't we? And paying less attention to what's around us.
I live in quite a rural area, and if I'm not driving, then I pay attention as we're driving to things that happen. I'll even sketch occasionally, just really quick sketches of something that's a snippet. But what I really notice is certain times of the year, the way the light catches, or what I noticed is I've sort of progressed in what I notice. So years ago, I used to notice colour a lot. Then I've noticed tone, and then what's very interesting is if I've gone on a sketch holiday, so I've been obviously working with other people as well, and it's been quite intense because it's been pretty solid, then what happens is I come back from that and I start to see compositions everywhere. And that's really weird, because it happens for a period of time and then it tails off slightly, because it's just that you've been spending that time concentrating on that. But I never used to go out and go, oh, look, that's a composition. That's what I found now, because I'm moving more abstract, I start to notice probably patterns and things more. I'm not a pattern painter, but I do like mark making to represent things. And so I zoom in quite a lot. So I'm not like a vast landscape painter. That's not where I'm at. I tend to really be observing all the little things and the way the undergrowth goes and the hedgerows and that sort of thing. So those sorts of really close things, or the way the ivy is on the tree, or and the bark, like you say, it would be, that sort of thing would really interest me. I'm constantly doing that, and I take photographs as well. And what's really interesting is your patterns of likes will show up in other things. So my son said, why do you never take photographs? I've paid attention now, of the whole of us. You take photographs, you zoom in on us, which is quite interesting, because I didn't even realise I did that. and after that, I occasionally do try and, take a whole picture of people's legs as well. Yeah. That's an interesting thing, because you still do it. So it doesn't matter whether it's poetry or whether it's you're out and about walking, or you're painting, or you're taking photographs. You do similar things.
Yeah, totally.
So you can get clues to yourself, your own observations, by looking back at your photographs.
Yeah, definitely.
So over to you, Ruth, because that's quite a lot.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what we've covered, what we've not.
Wondering about your observations, because your colours are quite bright. Yeah. And I mean, I always thought I was quite bright, but your colours are brighter.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about what you observe that's attracting you. That's a real, I'm really interested in that.
That's quite a challenging question for me, and I think there's different aspects of it. I think for me, painting, it's about creating something that's joyful, uplifting, and I think that's where the exaggerated colours come in. I think I've always enjoyed colour. I think I have had a bit of a light switch moment as well when I've seen certain artists, so I think that's played quite a big role in how I paint, as well as getting inspiration from people like David Hockney, who uses a lot of different colours in his artwork. You can tell what it still looks like the thing, so it still looks like a flower or a landscape, but he just brings in different colours to make the artwork contrast as well, and to make things pop out of the painting a bit more. And also I've got a background of textile design, so I did printed textiles at university, and the whole design aspect and pattern aspect to me I find really fascinating, the patterns that you find in nature. And I get a lot of that from just walking out and about, and I think I do see a lot of colours, obviously especially in the spring and summer in Scotland, that you might not necessarily associate with Scotland, but they're things that I take as inspiration, things like sunflowers, tulips. So again, I suppose it's about focusing on the bits that you find interesting and inspiring.
Yeah, my sister paints patterns a lot. So she does landscapes, but she'll do patterns within them, you know, and really obvious patterns. And it is quite interesting. I like organic lines, organic shapes. Definitely. So even where we're at now, we're still exploring, aren't we? That's like we're still observing.
It's never ending, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it isn't, but it's really interesting.
Yeah.
It gets, because when I came out of my degree, which was creative writing and music, and I could paint better painting, I always think that was to do with observation. It was because I had learnt to create better and to observe the world, and so therefore I actually painted better. Well, it definitely feeds back into your painting, doesn't it? I mean, there's, in the Artist Way, it talks about filling up your cup and making sure that you've got enough inspiration to actually do the work, because without that I think you would struggle, like you were saying before, Debs, with the blank canvas, to get something on the page. It's massively important. And it's also important to ask yourself why you're doing what you're doing, and try and dig down quite deep in order to focus yourself, because otherwise you could just be wandering around looking at absolutely everything and not really knowing. But that takes time. I would definitely recommend for people to take a step back and analyse their own work and why they've done what they've done, and to take a bit of time thinking about that stuff. And to start thinking of time that's not in the studio as creative time as well.
Yeah.
Because you can just be out for a walk and that could be quite creative, or you could be, you know, visiting a new city and you could be looking at buildings or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be an art gallery.
Yeah.
That can be a very creative pursuit that will feed back into your art. And I think that, you know, giving yourself permission to have time out to do those things, you know, walking along the sand and whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. It's what's interesting to you, and finding that out is good. It's just, I think, finding out who you are as a person, it's an amazing thing to do anyway, without painting.
Yeah. That's one of the, I've talked about this before, that's one of the real pleasures that I've got out of art, is finding more out about myself that I wouldn't necessarily have dug that deep without the art, because you ask yourself all sorts of interesting questions when you're doing creative things, and you're finding out more about yourself as you go.
We can move on to takeaways now. So we've talked quite a bit, and we'll just see what we've learned. Let's have a little chat about that.
I think for me, what really stood out in the conversation is when I was talking about leaving my day job and thinking about some of the challenges that I might have when I've got more time, which is probably the opposite of the way that we think about time. We think that you've got more time, it's going to be less of a problem. But I think one of my challenges is going to be keeping that focus narrowed, so that when I do have my creative time, that I'm using it wisely, I suppose.
And I would say that my takeaway is almost the opposite of yours. Or it's going to be what your problem is eventually, you know, when you actually leave work. And it's not that long now.
I know, it's amazing.
Great, isn't it?
It's exciting, but it's a little bit scary, I'm not going to lie. It's going to be a complete change for me, complete change of the routine, which is something that we spoke about, the kind of the habits that I'm in at the moment. I'm going to have a shift and a change, but something that me and Debs have spoke about, as well as doing my paintings, is going to be, we'll be running a membership together as well, which I think will, because I did want something to help give me some structure as well and give me something else to focus on, because I do enjoy the project management aspects of my day job. I do enjoy that kind of that organisation and facilitating part of it. So it's something that I wanted to bring into my art practice and create my own little community as well of artists.
I think that it would be lovely to do a community together, particularly seeing as we're doing this podcast together. So our own little Art Alchemy community.
Yeah, and I think we've got slightly different skills and ways of looking at things, and that always helps with working together. You've got your similarities, but then you've got different things that you can lean on each other for as well.
Yeah, and there'll be opportunities for us to lean to our strengths, and whoever comes into our community will have the benefit of us both, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I do think a big thing about it is also this carving out time. So my takeaway was to do with probably being a little bit more structured about my studio time. So I am structured because I have classes, but these are going to be changing because of the membership and things like that. I do find it's nice to anchor certain times of the week so that you still have routine when you're not working in a full-time official sort of way. It's a good thing to have a regular type anchor to your week.
Definitely.
So I've quite enjoyed having these regular recording sessions that we're starting to do and that sort of thing. And I like my newsletters every week because I reflect back on the week. So I like those little things that come into it. And I think a membership will provide all of that as well. But that's not the same as studio time.
No,
and the studio time is the thing that I also need to add in as a regular. Like, I need a little bit of flexibility because I do tend to be in different parts of the process at different times. But that doesn't mean to say that the studio time can't be a bit more regular, as part of my week, is what I'm thinking.
I think if it does help if you kind of build it as a habit and you've got a particular time or a particular day. It might be that you find there's a particular day that you want to carve out for it, Debs, if you're doing sort of longer stretches in the studio. Or it might be that you want to try, a bit like myself, doing a bit in the morning, doing a bit in the evening, and just giving yourself that time.
Well, I do have, like, Mondays and Fridays are meant to be studio days, but it's the fact that I get pulled off onto other things. So maybe a shorter period of time, which is the big takeaway for me, where you're saying, do half an hour a day.
Just a little bit. And it's amazing
you have
how
more
it adds
time,
up.
that's a bonus.
Yeah. But quite often the hardest bit is just getting started, isn't it? So if you have that time and you get going and you're finding you get into, I'm getting to the flow of this, and actually I've got the time to do more.
Yeah. And what I also find is when you're painting, it is okay to take a break and do a little bit of an email. But I think that sometimes it's harder to do it the other way around.
Yes.
So I quite often like, just changing from what I'm doing and doing something else. And then I will go back to the painting because I'm doing it. You're letting it dry. And it works, but I find it more difficult the other way around. So I think I should start with painting in the day.
Yeah, you've also made me think of something else there, which is something I do probably without thinking. I tend to write my newsletters on a Sunday, and that's after I've done my painting, where my brain's in painting and creative mode, and I find it much easier to articulate then what it is that I'm doing and why, particularly if I'm talking about work in progress in the studio. It flows a bit easier after a painting session because I've been in that mindset already of creativity.
I think I might do that too. I do that. What I mean is I don't find a problem with the newsletters, and I do like writing them on a Sunday. Yeah. But it is that relaxed feeling of a Sunday as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like today, I've actually, because I'm doing something after this, I have scheduled, so I've done it before. So in fact, it might have gone out whilst we're talking. But yeah, that's unusual. Normally, I actually quite like it on a Sunday morning, get me a cup of tea and write.
Yeah.
It's different. I haven't done the painting beforehand necessarily, but the Sunday feeling of I haven't got anything to do. I'll do my newsletter. It's nice.
Yeah,
I like that. Okay, any more takeaways and then?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that we've got through quite a lot in this chat, haven't we? We've talked.
It feels like a lot. Hopefully you've enjoyed it.
Yeah, hopefully you've taken something away yourself about creative time, no matter whether you're just at the stages of beginning or whether you're a full-time artist that was looking for a few new ways of looking at how you organise your routine, because it's quite easy to get into certain habits without even realising, isn't it? So it's good to reflect on what you do day to day, how you use your time. Yeah,
we'd like to hear about it as well. Tell us what you do, what your habits are, what your problems are as well, because that would be interesting, and we will get back to you. So whether you actually, if you look us up, you can either look us up for our own personal things. We'll just look us up in Google, you'll find us, and then just email us. The podcast, you'll be able to answer us on YouTube and Spotify. So just let us know how you find creative time or studio time, or the fact that you can't actually get any because you're doing other things. Let us know.
Yeah, that'd be great to hear from people. All right, Debs, well, it was a lovely chat as always.
Yeah, so I do enjoy it.
See you next time.
Yeah. Another Sunday morning activity.
Yeah.
Recording podcasts, writing newsletters. So, I'll just say bye for now.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.